Please welcome to the stage Liz Schrayer of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition and our esteemed panel.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Schrayer. I am President and CEO of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, and it is fabulous to be back on the Concordia stage with our incredible panel to talk about global food crisis, the supply chain, and I want to ground our conversation in a very unusual place, given we're here at UNGA. I'm going to talk for a second about America's heartland. So a few weeks ago, I was in Minnetonka, Minnesota at USGLC's Heartland Summit. It's a gathering in 12 states in the middle of our country where we bring together governors, mayors, farmers, faith leaders, business leaders with members of Congress to talk about the exact issues that are being talked about on the Concordia stage. And it will not surprise you that the primary focus was on food global crisis. And there were literally 200,000 citizens that tuned into the conversation because it had the same message that was in a Wall Street Journal ad that was placed yesterday, if you saw it, that said that global food security is national security. Because when you have 832 million people going to bed hungry every day, 50 million people on the verge of famine, it is a national security issue. So let's get into it, not just about the crisis, but also some solutions. So our fabulous USAID Deputy Administrator, Isobel Coleman, I want to start with you. Earlier this year, you said we may look back at 2022 as the year that broke the humanitarian system as we know it. I'd love to spend a whole hour, day hearing more about it, but I want you to look through the lens of the food crisis and tell us, where are we in this crisis, how serious it is, and what is USAID doing? Just give us a snapshot of the situation. Welcome, Isobel.
Well, thank you so much, Liz, and it's wonderful to be back on the Concordia stage, so thank you. The crisis that we're facing today was in some ways long in the making in years, previous years. Of course, it's a confluence of events. We've got the disruption of supply chains with COVID. We have climate change, which has led to drought in some very significant ways, particularly the Horn of Africa, but in other countries and big markets that have reduced agricultural output. And then, of course, we have Russia's invasion of Ukraine that has very, very much disrupted one of the breadbaskets, the major breadbaskets of the world. So all of these things together have conspired to really raise prices. So you've seen a price shock that has made it more expensive for people in the heartland to buy food, but it has made it prohibitively expensive for millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people living on the edge around the world who were already food insecure, and this has really put them into a crisis situation. So that's the situation we're dealing with. What USAID has been looking at is not just this year, but next year and out years, because it's not only food prices, it's fuel prices and transportation costs, all of the inputs that go into growing food. 30% of the world's food is produced by smallholder farmers. And that in and of itself is a very big number. But when you think about the concentration of smallholder farmer produced food for consumption in certain countries, it's a much higher number. So, poor people in many countries are very, very dependent on what is grown locally by smallholder farmers, and they are facing price shocks for the inputs that they need to be able to buy the fertilizer and the seeds to be able to grow this year and next year, and it becomes a downward spiral. So USAID is very focused on trying to allow smallholder farmers more access to fertilizer, more access to innovative seeds that allow them to have shorter growing cycles, that allow them to be more drought resistant, and technology that really helps them use, for example, less fertilizer using geospatial data, soil analysis that In a country like Ethiopia, where we've deployed this technology, farmers are able to use, in some cases, 80% less fertilizer with higher yields. So these are the types of things that we're working on.
Those are amazing. And I want to continue on this question of both what is happening that is problematic and also solutions, and go to John Tyson from Tyson's Food. Tyson's Food is on 5 continents. You're literally feeding the world. But what strikes me is also your headquarters in Arkansas. Your value chain is connected to 11,000 farmers throughout this country. So you really understand this connection of what I was talking about earlier globally and connecting to what's happening in our economy. So I have a question. Help us understand, is our supply chain literally holding up? And if not, why?
Well, great question. How is the supply chain doing? I think the last year or two have proved to us that there was some opportunities in terms of resilience, but my judgment is that things have kind of course corrected. Now, I think a lot of people in here will know that that there are still some opportunities as it relates to some flows and trade kind of easing in different parts of the world. But I think when we talk about resiliency and opportunities in the supply chain as it relates to food specifically, I think there's still some pretty concerning statistics out there as the amount of food that gets wasted in the world, not only in mature economies, but also in developing economies. And so I think what we have to focus on collectively, whether it be the capital markets, entrepreneurs, government agencies, or companies like ours, is how do we think about making and selling and transporting food in parts of the world where it's most needed. So I think that there's a few different things Tyson's working on with a lot of different partners, and some examples of those would be alternative proteins. We've made a lot of great investments in both plant-based and cell-based protein, which we're excited about. We see that as the next frontier. We've made a lot of investments in farmer resiliency, both in North America, but also in other parts of the world for sustainable food production. And we see that as promising and kind of preserving the future for farmers and trying to help producers get more money in their pockets. And I think the last thing I would say is there's a lot of great investment coming into the agricultural space that some of my colleagues here will be much more experienced than I am as it relates to artificial intelligence and kind of how we use technology to improve yields and improve productivity. And I think as long as we keep doing those things, I'm optimistic about the future. But the supply chain, to come back to your original question, I think it's working, but there's always room to improve.
I think there's a lot of consumers out there that want it, that are glad that it's working, but want to make sure it's improving. I want to bring in a view from what's happening in part of the world in Africa and turn to Dr. Chris Cleverly from Tingo. I'm intrigued by this week, the UN Secretary General Guterres launched the Global Africa Business Initiative, and for those that are running around and might have missed it, it's showcasing and spotlighting economic growth and investment opportunities across the continent. And I think so many of us know that 60% of sub-Saharan Africa is smallholder farmers, as Isobel talked about. And we know that for Africa's full agricultural to potential, it really needs investment in technology, it needs investment in partnership. And so I'm really interested, Chris, is what is companies like Tingo doing to innovate and transform the agricultural community, to invest in economic growth, in jobs, in health, to bring the citizens and increase the citizens' livelihood?
Well, look, these things are not unconnected, Liz.
Right.
If you think about it, 60% of smallholder farmers, of people are smallholder farmers in Africa. Well, they're the people you've got to feed as well, right? They're not different people. The farmer's not different from the person who needs the food. So what you've got to do is, instead of looking at necessarily technology per se, investment per se, what you've got to look at is, how do I help the farmer? How do I help the farmer to farm? If the farmer's helped to farm, he'll grow more food. It's not really rocket science. So what we try to do is we try to support that farmer at Tingo. We provide banking services, so there's financial inclusion. We provide access to great seeds and pesticides and fertilizers through our app. We provide them with a smartphone. And by doing good, we've done very well, and our business has grown to now we service 10 million farmers in Nigeria, and we want to expand outside of that. But it really goes down to the sort of points that Isobel's making, which is that, you know, if you don't make the smallholder farmer the hero of your story, you can't expect him to feed you. So start there, start at the base, look after the farmer.
I love that. I love that. All right, Jay Collins from Citi. We're really proud that Citi's a member of our board of directors. And one of the things that you have said that I absolutely love is when it comes to doing good and doing well, the private sector is all in. So you're a wonderful person to address this question. Over the last 2 years, you've played a really important role as the senior banker and financial advisor to the as from Citi's point of view, as the on the Global Vaccine Alliance COVAX. And so I'd love you to give your insights as to what lessons we can learn from the success on the global vaccines, so getting shots in the arm, to this global food crisis that we're in the midst of.
Fantastic. So I'm sure many of you in the audience are saying, what does vaccine solutions and distributions have to do with a global food crisis? But Citi was honored to be at the table and to be the risk and financial advisor to COVAX, which was really, outside of war, the single biggest global public-private partnership that the world has seen. And we pulled together for vaccine distribution large private sector investors, players, technology, everything from the ability to produce the vaccines and distribute them, to the policy layer on top of it, to the UN and official community's ability to organize ourselves to distribute vaccines, fund that commitment, some donor-based, some market-based, and it was an ecosystem response to a broken ecosystem for a global crisis. So we now have the same thing, and you've heard, I won't repeat the gravity of the food crisis situation that I and Citi see, but we have, just read David Beasley, listen to him talk about 323 million people in the world, 12% of sub-Saharan Africa that are suffering. So what do you do about it? We need granted COVAX wasn't perfect. We were flying the plane as we were trying to build it in the process, but we can do better applying that thought process to the food crisis. And so we need, first of all, to connect what is a broken whole food, meaning entire food chain ecosystem. It's broken, it's siloed. And you think about it from soil to fork, right? Everything from the large distribution players, the Cargills of the world, the large harvesters and machine manufacturers like the John Deeres, the ag chem players like the Cortivas and fertilizer producers. Obviously, the grocers, the Tysons, the fast-moving consumer goods players, all of and the ag tech players that are disrupting, as John mentioned, this extraordinary ecosystem. So you have these 6 or 7 major components: Rivelis in irrigation and water, AECOM, what they're doing in energy meets ag. They're not really at the table right now in terms of leading and responding to this crisis. And one of the things we're going to have to do is to take some of the lessons out of COVAX and figure out how the private sector can jump into the extraordinary work of USAID and the Biden administration in terms of the grant side of this, the official response, which is extraordinary, but that nonetheless puts the private sector in the room to help fix these problems.
So in our few minutes remaining, I want to pick up, Jay, on what you just started talking about, which is what's the solutions? So here's a tough question for all of you to answer in just about less than a minute each, is if Concordia is nice enough to invite the 5 of us back a year from now, and I would ask you to reflect on the last year. Each of you give us one public-private partnership, one innovation that made a difference in the fight for food, in addressing the food crisis. What was it? Sean.
Me first. You know, I think I'll recognize the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, just announced a big commitment, over $2 billion, to focus on climate-smart agricultural commodities. And there hasn't really been something of this scope and scale for a while, and I think this will be focused on North America, but of course the innovations that happen in this country have the opportunity to reach, you know, beyond the borders. And so I'm hopeful a year from now we'll see if this experiment works. Tyson is participating in some corn and soybean productivity around climate farming. Climate smart farming, excuse me. So
this intersectionality of climate and farming.
Yep.
Okay, Chris, what should we watch for?
I mean, I've just been listening, and what I don't think really taken on board is the fact that smallholder farmers have to pay 30-40% interest rates. So how are they going to grow anything, right? So it really is about the money and about our financial system. Our financial system is what crushes our food supply system. So I think I'd take the lessons of things like the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, that kind of a plan. We need something massive. We need someone to turn around and say, look, if we're going to create a food supply system, let's actually make sure that the farmers are well paid and they're paid on time. Let's actually create a big enough sum of money as a buying, maybe an investment fund, that actually allows people to know that when they grow something, it's going to get bought, and then allows them to borrow against that. You know, it's not complicated.
All right, connecting with climate, investing in the farmers. Isabel, what's yours to focus on?
Well, I'm going to foot stomp on Chris's point about investing in smallholder farmers, and I come back to, you know, seeds, fertilizer, tech, finance too, but also working with the private sector. In Ghana, for example, we are doing, in partnership with the African Fertilizer and Agribusiness Partnership and Yara, which is one of the biggest fertilizer companies in the world, a program to deliver 360,000 bags of fertilizer to smallholder farmers who are really, you know, the most vulnerable, and it's going to reduce their input costs by a third. And so this is reducing the amount of money they need to borrow, allowing them to produce more food going forward. But I think scaling up those types of public-private partnerships going forward a year from now will really deliver results.
All right, Jay. What's your crystal ball?
I'm going to throw a little hope in the room. And I basically said we're going to look back a year from now and say we had a cacophony. We had all these instrument players in the orchestra playing off different sheets of music at different time, unsequenced and uncoordinated. And the Biden administration is going to be the convener of choice, a conductor, put the players all in a room, like we did with COVAX, and start to assign policy-level private sector funding responses from farmers through the whole supply chain and say, here's how we're responding, on scale, globally, massively.
I was at the Global Food Security Summit yesterday, where there was an effort to bring the heads of state together, and what you're talking about is bringing
To put
now
the private sector,
private sector in the room together with the government, with the farmers. You heard it here on the Concordia state. See you back next year, and we'll see if their predictions came together. Please thank our expert panel.
Thank you.